Matthew, thanks for joining us.
Thank
Thanks for joining
you.
us in
Good
Doha.
morning.
Happy to have you. You're here representing your company, Concordia.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us a little bit about what you're working on at the moment.
Of course. So Concordia is a New York-based nonprofit, but globally focused, and we cover a wider range of topics through the different summits that we host that cover some of the world's most pressing issues and how the public and private sectors working together can advance positive social impact. It is our belief that one sector can't go at it alone, essentially, and I think there are countless examples you can look at, especially over the last 10, 20 years, where when one sector is approaching an issue, you oftentimes don't find the most tangible results and the most positive impact that you could have.
Sure. And here there's been mention of, we're going through a bit of an era where multilateralism is kind of declining ever so slightly. When you have these summits and you hold these conversations, is that a problem?
Well, I mean, first off, I think if you look at the statement, multilaterals are declining to some extent, or at least their influence is waning. I think that's been happening actually for a much longer period of time than people are willing to give credit. The key here is, are the institutions working? And I think what you see with a lot of political movements taking place around the world is that generally people feel, right or wrong, that the institutions are not working for them.
Sure.
And I think there's a lot of examples where they're absolutely correct. And so it takes that step to first understand why people feel the way that they feel, why these institutions are in dire need of reform, are in dire need of being updated, are in dire need of being, frankly, much more relevant to the public that they serve. And I think that's what these political movements are calling for. And I think there's a lot of justification to that. So yes, there are a lot of different things happening around the world, and sometimes even I will sit and think and feel. If you think about what's happening in Hong Kong, or you think about what's happening in Chile, if you think about the shift of elections, a post-Brexit world, America's role in the future, trade war with China, all of these different subjects, it's hard to not feel like the world is, splitting at the seams, if you will, to some extent. The key, though, is to understand how we got here, to then understand and think about how we move on from here.
So on that point then, I'm eager to get your perspective on, when we talk about this part of the world, you've just seen a landslide Conservative victory in the UK off the narrative of Brexit and Britain's separation from the European Union. As we mentioned previously, the US's foreign policy has been a little bit more relaxed. We're talking about popping borders up now, and that's left a bit of a void in this part of the world. We're seeing these youth-driven protests in Lebanon, in Iraq. Who's going to come and fill that void? And if you mind my saying, is that a job for someone like an EU, which may need a new kind of positive position?
An institution like the EU, I think it's entirely in their court to be able to adapt and change as a way to talk to younger people. One of the themes that I've seen from this forum is, what is the approach of governance when it comes to understanding why people feel the way they feel, and understanding how to move forward from here, but still maintaining the important tenets of the institutions with which they lead. But at its core, let's start with the first step. How are leaders communicating to younger people today to listen to what their concerns are, how they feel, and why they feel that way? And then design an institution that frankly can move and adapt in response to what they're saying. If you could point to a leader of a multilateral institution that is currently doing that incredibly successfully, I would be stunned, to be honest. Because I think that's the most important thing. I think we have yet to really think about how these institutions should adapt given the speed of information, frankly, misinformation and fake news, which also has become a major issue. And so the leaders that understand that at a core level and listen, I know it's a concept that's not easy for most of them, but listen, I think they will be the most successful in navigating these very complex times.
On this topic, when we talk about forums, we talk about these summits, it's a good opportunity while we're here to be a little reflective. How do we ensure that those conversations that are being had properly? They're not being used for some kind of political gain or statement, and that action actually comes from these?
Well, let's start with the first part of your question. I think it is what I look at from my role, my co-founder's role, and the team's role at Concordia is very much around being objective. It is not our job to facilitate one side and not facilitate another side. It is not our job to create a forum that is the world as I see it. It's
Sure.
the world as Matt Swift sees it. That's not my job. My job is to curate a collective community of good institutions, good people, good companies, good governments to talk about the most pressing issues in an objective fashion. And so, first rule is if you're talking about a subject, you better have people who are on the ground participating in that subject. So we take great responsibility in the programming that we curate. Inclusivity in these kind of conversations is so important so that you have an objective analysis of what's happening. And so I think that's the job of these sorts of forums going forward.
Yeah.
It is not to celebrate their exclusivity and how difficult of a barrier to entry they have to be able to gain access to something like this. It needs to be about empowering the unheard, empowering people that are on the front lines to talk about these issues. And for forums like the Doha Forum or Concordia, to be able to curate that, we have a responsibility to present a genuinely balanced, objective conversation around an issue more than anything. So I think that's the key of these sorts of forums and dialogues. The dialogue doesn't matter if you're not factoring in all the different populations and people affected by these different global events.
Absolutely. And as we say, these ever more important because of this growing youth in influential positions as entrepreneurs in politics now. These people, young people coming through and really driving their passions and the way they want to see the future at a governance and policy level. So these platforms become ever more important.
And things are changing dramatically. I mean, in the United States, as a U.S. citizen, we have a president who I think understood at a remarkable level why a large population of the United States felt left behind. And you know what? They were left behind. That's the key. That's what always fascinates me in watching these political debates is at its core, you have to really understand why people feel the way they feel, to some extent respect it, and then to understand why they have made political decisions that have really changed the political identity of the country, right? They want pragmatism. They want somebody who gets things done. They want somebody who speaks to them, right? And I think that's what's been happening in the UK. I think that's what's happened in the United States. And I think we're starting to see that happen in so many other countries around the world.
Matt, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.